Hey everyone, and welcome back to Volunteer Friendly. Boy, oh boy, am I excited for today's episode. This one's going to definitely step on some toes, which I love doing and enjoy doing. But I think it's a really important thing to discuss. I should start though, if you're brand new to Volunteer Friendly, welcome, glad you're here. Volunteer Friendly is different than other content I post here on the channel. This is a show for folks that are involved in making Sundays happen. Worship leaders, production managers, tech directors, creative directors at churches, people that are really involved in making Sundays happen. And the rest of the channel is tech content. Some of it's geared towards church. Most of it is not. But this is a real kind of passion project for me. And I've heard from a few of you that have benefited from this. So this show is not an interview show. I don't interview famous worship leaders from famous churches. We don't try to duplicate or copy the ministry philosophy of other people. But it's all about asking questions and really thinking, kind of the Socratic method of ministry, if you will, which ruffles some feathers from time to time. Some people don't like it. Today, again, like I mentioned, this episode I've been looking forward to for a while. Today, we're talking about suffering for the sake of ministry. And this is really should be a topic that a pastor that's trained and knows their theology really well should discuss. And I'm going to try to steer away from, try to steer away from the theology of suffering and the role suffering plays in a believer's life, because I'm not a pastor. I'm not ordained. Although the first church I worked at, technically I was a pastor because of the way they did that, but that was kind of like I think it was more for tax purposes than anything else, if I'm being honest. But I don't want to talk about the theology of suffering, because there's a place for that. There's people that are far smarter than I am that can talk about that, preach on that. That's not what we're talking about today. What I specifically want to talk about is, this is an episode geared towards a lot of my friends that I've had a lot of discussions with. And it's an episode that, particularly number 3, Volunteer Friendly every week, I give 3 different questions to kind of contemplate and think through. And number 3 is something I've struggled with. But I want to talk about this from the perspective of conversations I've had with friends of mine that work at churches, conversations, internal dialogues I've had with myself and other people. For me, as I've considered working in a church, leaving a church, I just a couple weeks ago left my job at my church and am full-time with From Studio to Stage. And I struggled with some of this. So again, I want to stress very clearly, I am not trying to provide my opinion or theological discussion on the role of suffering and in a Christian's life and how God uses that. But what I do want to talk about, and again, I try to not use this podcast as a platform for my own ministry philosophies. I try to just throw questions out there and get your thoughts and hopefully make you think about them and discuss them yourself. What I want to discuss is when we use suffering as an excuse for not leaving a place that we likely should leave. So let's go ahead. Let me just come in with a presupposition of you're at a toxic place. You're at a church with a pastor who thinks they are the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's unhealthy. You get treated like garbage. You're underpaid. You're overworked. You just get no respect from a pastor. The pastor views you as someone who's just purely there to implement their own thoughts, their own, the blessing from God. And, you're just there to serve their vision and implement that. And again, we could break that down that is part of a role of someone on staff and working under someone's leadership. But what I'm trying to draw the distinction is a place that anyone kind of categorically will look on from the outside and go, this place is toxic and unhealthy. I don't know why those places exist. I don't know why they often grow, and sometimes they're large churches, but they chew people up and spit them out. Like, it's just unhealthy place. But let's say you're at one of those places and you stay at that place. And the reason you stay at that place is you feel like you are called to suffer for the sake of ministry. Because you're in ministry, you should be suffering. It shouldn't be glamorous. You should, have a pity party for yourself every week, because God has called you to this very holy profession of playing 3 chords and singing some Chris Tomlin lyrics every week. God has called you to this very holy profession of running lights, but not in a place with sinners, in a place with sinners that are claim to be Christians that still annoy you as much as other people. So let's just kind of set the playing field here. We're at a place that's toxic. We're at a place that's unhealthy, place that we should leave, and anyone looking on from the outside should leave. And I want to clarify again, this is not a place where God has specifically called you and said, you should stay here. This is the place you need to be. Because I think there's times for that. But you're at a place where you are saying, I'm suffering for the sake of ministry. You maybe believe that ministry should be difficult and ministry should be unfun, and you should be underpaid and you should be overworked because somehow you're doing it for God's glory, and somehow God is honored by people being trampled on and taken advantage of, and you like wear that as a badge of honor. It's almost this kind of weird, again, I'm trying really hard not to clearly you know my opinions on this. I'm trying hard to not turn this into a 10-minute sermonette, but you're at a place that's unhealthy, but you feel like you should be there because ministry should be suffering. Like, I'm just going to get to the questions because I'm struggling to like avoid to say things and to say things. I just want to say, this is kind of the place we're at. I don't want to provide a solution. I want you to work through in prayer and, talking to friends outside of your church, maybe friends that have already left your church, talking through these questions to see if this leads you somewhere or helps you. Okay. So let's get to this. Every week on Volunteer Friendly, I should mention, I offer 3 questions, for you to contemplate and then hopefully discuss with your team. I don't know this is going to be much of a discussing with your team, but I do hope it's a set of questions that you can contemplate on your own, and then take this to trusted advisors, people not on staff at your church, people older than you, people wiser than you, that you can say, I kind of feel like I'm in this place. So if you find yourself in a place where you're at a place that's unhealthy, you, in the back of your mind, you feel like you should leave, but you feel like you've got to suffer for the sake of ministry, I want to encourage you to work through these 3 questions. To make it easier, every week I give you a download of these 3 questions to contemplate on your own, discuss with your team. Here's question number 1. We'll spend a little bit of time unpacking these. Number 1, are you really supposed to be there, or are you afraid? Are you really supposed to be there, or are you afraid? I think so often outwardly we say, oh, I'm supposed to be here. I'm called to be here because, and I'm suffering right now, but I'm suffering for the sake of the Lord, and I'm suffering for the sake of ministry. And I know that, again, that's such a hard discussion to have because there's literally countries where people are like boldly sharing the gospel and sending Bibles and sneaking Bibles in at the risk of death. And they are suffering for God's glory and suffering for ministry. We're just overworked and underpaid. I don't think we're really quote unquote suffering, but I think so often we use that as kind of an excuse of like, I need to stay here because I'm called to suffer. I'm called to honor God in my suffering. I read this book or whatever, and so I feel like I'm called to honor God in my suffering for the sake of ministry. But here's the question I have. Number 1. Are you really supposed to be there, or are you just afraid? And you're using this idea of suffering, this idea of like, I'm going to stay in this unhealthy environment because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of going somewhere else. I've been here for 10 years. I've raised my family here. We have roots and we're afraid to leave. So therefore, I'm willing to stay at a place that's unhealthy, and maybe even stay at a place I'm not supposed to be because I'm so afraid. Now, if you thought that one hit home and hurt, here's the next one. Number 2, are you staying out of pride? And again, this is a tricky subject because this has been done before, where people are called to be at a place to reform it. People are called to stay at a place that's unhealthy, to lead it out of its unhealthiness into a state of health. It's 100% done. But I think sometimes, more often than not, I felt this for me, that I almost feel like I'm being called to be a Martin Luther sort, to go nail my 95 thesis on the door of the pastor to say, you should not teach this way, you should lead this way, you should do that. And it's really out of pride. It's out of this deep-seated pride that I feel that I can be the savior that can come in and fix this, that if only I was in charge. And this is particularly true for those of us that have not been in roles of leadership. It's really easy when you're not leading to know exactly how everything should be led. Raise your hand out there if you've experienced that before. There's someone under your leadership or you looking on at leaders, it's really easy to look on and have all the right answers and know exactly how things can be done. It's a different thing when your butt's on the line and you have to make the decision and you feel the fear and the panic and all these people looking up to you that are under your leadership. But are you staying out of pride? It's an unhealthy place. Do you feel like you're called, quote unquote, to be there to reform it because you're the only person that God could use to reform it? Again, sometimes I know that to be true. I've seen that with friends. I've seen that with people. But I think for the majority of us, we're operating out of pride with a little bit of fear that's causing us to stay there. Number 3, do you feel like you have to work at a church? This one is big for me. I'm going to do my best to try to explain this. Do you feel like you have to work at a church? I think sometimes when you've been on staff at a church for a long time, you get this, it's probably a little bit of pride. It's a little bit of insecurity where you almost feel like you are closer to God because you are, quote unquote, in ministry. And if you were to leave a church and just work a 9-to-5 job, work at a place that's, quote unquote, not a Christian organization, although organizations cannot be Christians. But you're leave a church, you go work in another place. You have this almost fear, this weird karma, Christian karma thing of like, God is not going to love you. You're not going to honor God as much if you leave a church and go do just a job, which is completely untrue. And when you think about it, it's absolutely ridiculous when we're leaders in churches that are leading people who are not on staff at a church, and we have this sense of pride or arrogance of almost like, we're better than you. We're going to tell you how to do this. But sometimes I think we find ourselves where we really should leave. We're maybe even called to lead. That's probably what God wants us to do. But we feel like we have to stay because we have to work at a church. And yeah, maybe you go to another church, but maybe God's just calling you to go to the marketplace and to create a great product and to serve people and treat people well and show Jesus to people by the way that you create content or the way that you serve hamburgers or the way that you fix things or the way you do whatever the thing you do. So I hope this episode hit home. I hope that ruffled some feathers. That's my goal. I know it ruffled feathers for me, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening to Volunteer Friendly. We post new episodes every Thursday. The goal is to be less than 10 minutes. I've gone over each the past few weeks, and so I'll do my best to keep it under 10 minutes here. Make sure you download those questions, those processing questions. Really think through this stuff. Pray about it. Hope it helps, and we'll see you next week, Thursday, 10 a.m. Central. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody. Bye.